So today I want to talk about depression and politics. And I know what you're thinking. Those are like my two favorite things ever. I know, right? So buckle up. If you don't know me, my name's Rebecca. I have treated hundreds of patients as a psychiatric nurse, and I myself have also experienced depression. I want to let you know how politics affected my mental health and what I learned so you can avoid what I went through. And if you're not really interested in my story, skip ahead to those awesome 3 reasons I think you should stop following politics. So a little bit about my experience. I grew up in a very liberal area with a very liberal family. And I was probably more involved than like the average person because my family taught me that if you're not doing stuff, then you hate your country basically. So I would send some letters to some Congress people and get in the occasional Facebook, Twitter argument, just trying to do my part for the country. I did not digest helpful sources or watch the news a lot, so looking back, I would not label myself as informed. Back in the day, I don't know if any of you remember these days, these pre-Trump days, but even in the Obama days, if you were a liberal, it was your obligation to hate Republicans. I thought Republicans were racist, sexist, basically like the worst thing you could be was a Republican to me. Just a little side note, not important, I didn't actually know any Republicans. What? My city, my high school was so liberal that if there were any, they definitely didn't speak out. So basically I hated an entire group of people based on their belonging to a certain group. There might be a word for that. So when the 2016 election came around, you can imagine like what me and my family were thinking. But I ended up meeting someone that told me they were voting for Trump. And get this, they were a lovely and sweet human being. What the fuck? Like, just to get a picture of how nice this person was, I don't know if you guys have met people that are like so nice. You're like, how are they that nice? How did they get that nice? Like, what can I do to be like them? Like, this was how nice this person was. But of course, at this point, like, forget Republicans. A Trump supporter was the worst thing you can be. So meeting this person really messed with my tiny little brain. I basically assumed they were ignorant, they didn't know what they were talking about, they've never watched the news, and I could re-educate them, if you will, which sounds lovely. So we ended up having a lot of discussions, and shocker, some got pretty heated, and this was on my part mostly, because this is a very nice person I was dealing with. But I ended up realizing this wasn't really a stupid, ignorant person that I was dealing with. I couldn't regurgitate the same talking points I had done with so many other Republicans and convince them. And I remember just regurgitating all these talking points, and this person would be like, where are you getting this? Like, where did you learn this? And a key phrase I would love to use is look it up anywhere. Because I thought in my mind it was so obvious, this was such obvious knowledge, like how could somebody not know this? And this person will still make fun of me to this day. If I ask them where they got their source, they'll say, look it up anywhere. So this wasn't working, so I decided to try to understand where they were actually coming from, which was a fanatical approach for me. So of course talking, I still disagreed with like almost everything, but I ended up understanding more of what made someone become a Trump supporter. And maybe they're not all bad people that are supporting him. I know, crazy notion. I was excited with this knowledge because I thought, maybe I can understand more of the other side, and maybe they're not actually that evil, and maybe they just want the country to be better just like the liberals do. And I figured, wow, what a better world that I'd be living in if that was all true. So little naive Becca, looking for validation for her new wonderful ideas, I went to my liberal friends and my liberal families with my newfound understanding of this other side. I would never even try to argue for Trump talking points or anything like that. I was trying to show them why I thought people ended up thinking like this and what process led them there. So I should have expected this, but I was young and stupid, but I was met with the same disdain and the frustration that I figured I probably showed to my Trump supporter friend when we were first talking. So I got a good look in the mirror and I realized that I had been just as hateful, if not more so, as the other side that I had hated for so long. So what does this have to do with depression? So I had been part of this group my entire life, and one day I tried to ask questions. I started to be curious, and it was no one's fault, but I was kind of met with some hate and frustration, which led me thinking, is this a group that I really want to be part of? And I didn't radically change my values or I didn't switch group. I just thought, is this a group that's a productive one and is going to make my life better by being a part of it? And dealing with these questions, dealing with the potential to disassociate from this group, created huge turmoil in my life and like made my depression way worse. Okay, so this brings me to the 3 points that I want to make. Number 1, paying attention to politics when you are depressed makes absolutely no sense. If you are in a bad state of mental health yourself, you are not going to be able to do anything for the world, I promise you. 2, getting a free sense of purpose by identifying with a group, whether it's political in my case, or racial or sexual, can become completely unproductive and make your mental health worse. And then 3, this is kind of a simple one, but the more hate you have in your heart, the more hateful a person you are, the more depressed you'll be. So for number 1, paying attention to politics makes no sense when you're depressed. When I was working in a psychiatric unit, we had patients that would sit in the dining area and watch CNN, which baffled me at the time that that was allowed. We used to tell patients who were desperately trying to leave because they wanted to go see their kids and they wanted to make sure their kids were okay, that like, no, you need to worry about yourself right now because your kids deserve the best of you. Which makes total sense. I totally see where they're coming from. Yet we allowed them to watch the news and worry about the state the world is in. And I don't think that watching the news is inherently bad, but if you just tried to kill yourself, there's probably some bigger things you need to be worrying about. If you're struggling with mental health issues, any depression issues, I want to give you permission to stop paying attention to the news. And don't worry, you're not a bad person. If there's another lockdown, if climate change is about to blow up the world, like you'll find out, I promise. Like going to restaurants, the news is on, your friends will text you, your parents will text you, someone will let you know. For me, I can digest some news at some points, but if I'm having a bad week, a bad month, whatever, I'll tell my husband, I'll tell my parents like, hey, let me know if anything's going on that I need to know about, but right now I'm giving up on the news. I'm gonna focus on some other stuff. And here's the other thing. I'm not saying don't vote or don't participate if it actually makes you feel better, but I know people who are constantly watching the news and constantly looking at what pops up in their email or what pops up on Apple News on their phone and reading articles, especially because they have catchy titles. So I want to challenge you to evaluate if it's truly making you feel better or if you're just trying to avoid feeling guilty, like I was. If you care about something so strongly, decide if it's you caring about it or if you're just being told to or influenced to by some outside source. All these titles and headlines and the little things that run across the news, like they're meant to be catchy and they're probably not even informing you of what's actually going on anyway. If it was beat into you that you need to pay attention or else you're going to destroy the world and you're a terrible person, I just want you to understand that you're not doing anything about it by being hateful and upset like I was. So let's move on to number 2. Getting a free sense of purpose by identifying with a group can totally make your mental health worse. A lot of time in this situation when you're part of a group, you may not even be willing to work on yourself because you outsource that personal development to the development of the group. And it took me a while to understand this, but groups don't exist. Individuals exist. A lot of the times too, when a group is victimized and you are part of the group, you'll say to yourself, well, I'm part of the group, so I must be a victim as well. And I'm not saying groups aren't helpful and groups don't have their place in people's mental health, but they don't actually exist. They're made up of a composite of individuals. And this is kind of an extreme comparison, but this is how I see my situation looking back. If you look at how a cult acts when someone like first joins, they're so supportive and they're so nice and they're so awesome. And then you kind of like go against their beliefs or even just like question their beliefs. And sometimes they start to get volatile, hateful, and could be even dangerous. I just remember coming up in high school and wanting so badly to participate in like political discussions at family dinners. And when I would bring something up or I would agree with someone or I would have a point that no one else knew, I would feel so freaking good. That high was like awesome. But then when I brought up some questions and started to ask questions about things I had taken as a given my whole life, it got kind of nasty. I'm not saying this happens in every group. I'm just saying like for me, that's kind of how I felt. So this kind of leads me to the final point. Being a part of a group can make you very hateful, and the more hateful you are, the more depressed you'll be. Looking back to that time and knowing what was in my brain at the time, I was like a bad person. Which is crazy to say, and so many people that I know are like, no, you weren't, like, whatever. But I know how I was feeling, and I can tell you honestly, like, I was a bad person. And being so hateful, at least regarding politics, I've seen so many people act the same way. I'm sure everyone has. If you hold such a strong hatred for a group of people, even if you think they're the right people to hate, you're going to be miserable, I promise you. Eventually, I would challenge everybody, and I think it would make the most difference in your life if you actually tried to empathize with the other side and see where they're coming from, and even the most extreme people. But I will warn you, that is so hard. That for me took months. It was such a long process and created so much turmoil and even more depression, really. So if you're dealing with a lot of depression, for now, I would just say stop. Stop paying attention. Just like give yourself a break, and maybe eventually you can make it there. I watched this amazing TED Talk, and I'll link it down below because I can't remember what it's called, but it was an African-American gentleman, and he basically tried to understand why people were racist, why people hated him just because of what he looked like. And he ended up interviewing the head of a KKK organization, and they ended up talking more, and the African American gentleman was in a band, and the KKK member would go to see him play, and he would go see his rallies. Like, it was like mind-blowing. But at the end of the TED Talk, spoiler, if you want to go watch it, but he had his KKK uniform on the stage. So basically, they had become so close, and the KKK member realized what he was doing kind of made no sense, and he gave up his involvement with this terrible organization. So in my head, I think of that whenever I want to hate the other side. I think to myself, what right do I have to hate the other side if this gentleman could do something like this? Go watch that video, because that's way better video than this one. Anyway, when you realize that you're kind of a bad person, remedying that is so worth it for your mental health. But of course, like I said, it's also extremely difficult. So I hope you liked that video. I hope those were enough reasons for you to stop watching politics. If you have anything to add, if those weren't enough reasons for you, leave in the comments, email me. I will give you more reasons. Doing this has made my life so much better. And like I said, I'm not trying to say don't vote, don't do stuff, but voting is once a year. Like, I can catch up on most of the stuff that happened within that week that I'm supposed to vote. I just want you to sit down and really evaluate what paying attention is actually doing for you and make a decision based on that. But as always, let me know if you guys need anything, and I'll see you next time.